di dina di dina tuna katta dak dina din din da din din da tuna katta din.
All right, welcome back. Our next speaker joins us from London, Aniruddha. Aniruddha leads experience strategy and design for clients across industry domains, across B2B and B2C and enterprise markets. Aniruddha has a keen passion for building high performance teams. He has built, established, and scaled multidisciplinary teams across Europe, UK, and India. He currently works as an experienced director at Cognizant. Aniruddha Jha, welcome to the Odisha Design Week. You have 45 minutes followed by Q&A. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Suresh, and thank you everyone, Paresh, the Odisha Design Week team, and everybody else for having me. Right, a real pleasure to be a part of this this festival, this panel, and to be talking along the likes of such esteemed panel. So really honored and humbled to be here and getting a chance to talk about some of my experience and learnings with all of you. Um, Let me quickly start and share my presentation. Um, I had taken a slightly offbeat topic, but I hope this would help in potentially me sharing a little bit of an industry view in the software and digital design industry, and that's the area of design operations, or as it's called, design ops. And I did want to talk about, given the theme of our festival, a little bit of impact of culture on this as well, because I think it's quite critical. Um, Let me just quickly get started. Firstly, a very quick introduction about me. I'm Aniruddha. I usually go by Ani. Um, my background is completely in design. That's what I've studied, and that's what I've worked throughout my career. I'd started um, I started my design career back in a small design consulting startup in Bangalore called Fierce Usable, and we used to advise startups in India and also in US. Typically, small startups that did not have design teams of their own, and they wanted some consulting advice as to how to approach the market, approach the pilot, etc. I also was for a small bit a researcher at a university in Switzerland, and we were doing some uh, really amazing and fun experiments with interactive tables. So we would put speakers and microphones around the tables and various LEDs to project some visualizations, and then we'll play around with the concept of, can we help improve the quality of the conversation happening around the table by giving subtle cues to the participants, right? So really fun experiments, and as I like to joke around, doing IoT before it went mainstream. And then I think for a pretty long time now, I've been a part of Cognizant's interactive and digital experience practice, and my role, throughout my tenure here has been to, for example, lead various product design initiatives, digital transformation initiatives from a user-centered design point of view, and not just doing it for our clients, but also using them as a way to um, evangelize and promote user-centered way of working, both within my organization and within the various client organizations that we work in, right? I started my career back in India, but I've also spent some time in Switzerland, as I was mentioning, in the Middle East, in UK, where I've spent most of my career so far, and also in Nordics for a couple of years when I was setting up the design practice there. So that's a little bit about me. Uh, I wanted to jump straight into this the topic of design ops, right? And I think for many of you, because this is not really a topic that necessarily gets taught quite early on and necessarily in school. Um, I guess that many of us would not be familiar with this term and may want to know what it is, right? Um, so design ops or design operations is essentially our design industry's response to the agile ways of working that are happening in the industry, right? um, the practices like develops, which is development operations, is quite mainstream, quite well established by now in various organizations. And that's essentially talking about how does the development process, how does the software development process happen in the organization, right from architecture and solution design to actually code being launched and managed and maintained, right? um, and as the design industry grows, especially in these tech companies, the consulting companies, uh, we have realized that we need a similar standardized, uh, operations manual, if you will, if we have to do our job well in this industry. So design ops as a term, I think I had probably first heard about that maybe 5 years back, and ever since then it has gone quite mainstream in our industry. Now you can find dedicated design ops teams in certain organizations. You can find annual conferences where people just talk about design ops and how they're approaching it in their organizations. So it is kind of getting a lot of visibility and recognition, and rightly so in the recent months and years. uh, what is it? It's essentially looking at various pillars through which we can execute our design work and processes very well within our areas of practice, and make sure that the impact of design gets maximized. And typically you would see that the few pillars and foundation areas that industries talk about when they're looking at design ops tend to be in the area of processes, which is how do I execute work? How does the design process in our organization look like? What is our outlook on how we conduct research? What is our outlook on how much iterations we do, and what is the fidelity of the designs we produce in order to assess the ideation process and the software development process, right? What are the tools we use? What are the softwares? What are the methods utilized if we are conducting user interviews, or if we are conducting unmoderated usability tests on our products, etc., right? And the third is about individuals themselves, right? And by individuals we are obviously talking about not just the designers, which are part of the team itself, and what are their responsibilities, what does their job description look like, what does their career progression look like, how do they collaborate and work with one another, because that's internal to their design group. But it's also about um, collaboration with externals, the other stakeholders, the other team members we are working with who are not designers. So for example, how do designers work with the marketing function, the product function, the engineering function, the end users, external influence towards the wider public and industry. Um, so I think the design ops tends to be, your guiding kit towards how you organize and execute design in your organization. Um, if we zoom in a bit more, and I wanted to talk especially about two specific models which are quite popular, right? This is by Nielsen Norman Group. Many of us, I assume, are quite well familiar with them. Um, and their take on design ops is these three pillars: how we work together. Um, you know, um, this is all about organization, collaboration. Um, how do we get work done, which tends to be the process area that I was talking about. But they emphasize the importance of consistency and standardization of the way you work across the various projects in your organization, various products in your organization. How do we harmonize, which means some of the common pitfalls in a big organization especially is chances of duplicate work happening across the organization, and potentially two or more different teams trying to solve the same problem in their own different ways. And there are opportunities to be more efficient, etc. And prioritization, which means amongst the thousands and thousands of potential improvements and new ideas that we can explore, which ones actually are the ones we should focus on. um, and then the last point that Nielsen Norman Group emphasize is around impact, right? How do we measure, whether our design is leading to the stakeholder value, to the business value that we were planning to do, we were planning to achieve, and how are we doing on that? Where are we in the current journey towards that? How do we socialize it? Which means, if we are achieving some wins, how do we make sure that that success story and those lessons learned get shared across the organization, so that more and more parts of the organization and partner ecosystem realize the value that design brings in, right? um, and then thirdly, using that as an opportunity to enable more and more work to be done in a user centric way, right? uh, the second framework, which I think goes a little bit further beyond, is by Envision. And by the way, I very strongly recommend some of the guidance and some of the material they have available online if somebody is quite interested to know about design ops. They have a brilliant design ops handbooks besides many other handbooks, and it's a really great guidance for beginners to this area. And it covers the points that I talked about previously, but it also focuses a little bit more on the governance aspects of it. As teams go big, what are the measures that are in place to make sure that design is working in the right direction? And also it goes specifically a bit more deeper into what does it mean for the team members involved as well, right? Uh, what are their roles and responsibilities? What is within their remit to decide when they're doing their design work versus what's kind of defined at a team level, etc. Now, talking about my experiences in this area, right? And one of the things that I find really funny is, across my engagements where I have worked in the area of design ops, um, never ever actually has this been a formal part of my job description, or my expected role when we were starting an engagement, right? um, in my most recent program, where I've done most work in this area, my official role is that of a human-centered design lead for a public rail client. And my own design function is more than 30 designers, and these 30 designers are overall working with more than 1,000 other project team members, from engineering function to product function to business function, etc. And we are talking about more than 20 product pods that are operating in parallel on this, right? So while the scale and the magnitude of this work would probably demand that we establish and execute these design operations quite well and quite formally, I've seen that in this as well as in my previous engagements, it always tends to be something that happens organically over time, right? Uh, Previously as well, when I was working with one of our payment processing clients, and we were a small team, and we were doing, you can say, almost like new value proposition ideation and experiments. Uh, we did design ops to a certain level during that time as well. Um, and then when I was working for a bank here in London, we had a small design team here as well, and we were working with them on phase-wise increments. So I think worked in the design of space in varying capacity, not knowing in either of these cases initially that I was going to be formally working on design ops, but that is how we have shaped things to be. Uh, so what I wanted to do was, right, rather than the complex conceptual models and representations that I was showing before, I just thought, to share in as simple a language as I could think of, right, my own learnings and stories for how and why we went the design ops way in some of these projects, and whatever I realized to be a typical journey in this area, right? Um, the first initial stage, right, I have called it tier one as an example, happens when typically the teams starting are quite small in nature, right? And I'm talking about design teams here. So typically it tends to be when I have my teams of at best 5 team members, right? And this also typically happens towards the start of an engagement, if you belong to a consulting or a vendor company, or potentially when the design function is new in the organization, if you are part of, or part of product functions and product companies, etc. And when that happens, the typical questions that are part of designers' minds are, hey, what tools and softwares are we using, right? Am I, for the product designers in the audience, am I going to use Figma for this? Am I going to use XD for this? Where are we going to share our assets? Are they going to be stored in a particular asset management platform? Are they going to be stored in a design library? What is going to be the versioning and conventions, right? I think few people more than designers realize the absolute pain when it comes to different ways in which various designers uh, name their files, share their files, etc. Right? So I think I'm no different in my own early days. It's not surprising to find a file named deliverable xyz underscore version 17.2 underscore final, right? Which makes absolutely no sense. So small, very very small hygiene elements like that uh, typically can be a cause of confusion and a pain. So usually those are some of the things that you can easily weed out right at the beginning of any engagement, right? Now, given if this team of up to 5 members is not working on the same thing, how do you make sure that and can benefit from what each and everyone else is doing? So you will usually come up with certain ways of doing that, right? You may have stand-ups, you may have hurdles, but you would find some relatively low-key ways in which you can catch up and be aware of what each and everybody is doing, and potentially get a chance to ask questions, suggest feedback, etc. Now, as you progress further, right, and this is where potentially you're scaling your design function, or the magnitude of your project a little bit bigger, uh, you have gotten some of these initial hygiene elements taken care of, but then the set of challenges that you start facing become a bit bigger, right? It's no longer about whether what software are you going to use in order to do your designs, but rather it's actually about all right, even if we are using the same tools, we can no longer necessarily create our own unique solutions to everything, because there will emerge patterns where things start overlapping. uh, you start running into repetitive problem statements, repetitive user needs in forms of interaction, and it makes sense for you to aim for consistency in which you solve it, right? And this is where some of the more advanced tools and methods, like design system, like journey maps, like journey blueprints, etc., come into play. So you will start working more in the area of that, and in my experience, that needs to be formalized only when your team grows beyond a particular size, right? So we are talking potentially a team of 10 designers, etc., working together. You also evolve from just talking versioning conventions and more basic elements to overall guidelines as to how you work together, right? So this may be in terms of a guidance pack that gets issued to the designers when they join in, or can also happen in person. You walk a designer through when somebody new joins your team as to how you guys go about working, right? Your stand-ups and hurdles, they also evolve. They are no longer just your casual and free form catch-ups, but now you need to structure them a bit more, so that everybody gets the maximum value out of it, right? You would potentially start formalizing your design critique sessions, right? And for some of you on the session who might not necessarily be aware of that, the critique is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it's more or less never a bad thing. This is a constructive way in which designers get over their challenge of being a bit of perfectionist, which I've realized over a period of my career is not a good thing. It's amazing to strive for perfection, but you really need to be open to feedback at all times. And there's nothing that does it better than organizing regular design critique sessions in your in your teams and functions, in which case on a regular basis teams present the work they're doing, although if it is in really early stages, really early thoughts, because the idea is not to uh, feel like your value as a designer is associated with what you're presenting, but rather the idea is for you to absolutely get over any ego involved and just be looking for the best idea and the best problem statement out there. Your teams also evolve, right? So you're no longer just informal peer groups, but you start becoming a design community with more and more active role to play in the organization. And then I think there's the top tier, right, which is where um, if you continue with the same themes, uh, at the tools and processes level, right, you're no longer talking about only softwares, etc., or methods, etc. You're talking about organizing the immense amount of data and insights that you're setting on, right? So how do we, for example, plan for identifying the overlaps and the journeys? If your organization is building 10 different products, which hopefully will not be completely siloed products for your customers, how do you make sure that for the customer it's an easy seamless journey through and through? So you'll potentially look at some advanced frameworks and tools like blueprints, like catalogs, in order to document the user journey slices and what parts of that get covered by what product, what are the overlapping points, and how would you design for that, right? Your guidelines become playbooks, because in teams of pretty significant sizes, it's not possible to do that hand holding and walk through always in person and be there to really guide each and every team member throughout their work, right? So you would end up building tools like playbooks through which your team members can be familiar with the work done so far and what they need to know about the background, the insights we have from our research work so far, um, any challenges that we need to be aware of in terms of platform constraints, technology constraints, etc. Um, you would also go further in the way you are organizing your forums, and you may introduce certain formal themes to your forum, so that not everybody who needs to be part of every conversation, waste their time necessarily, but rather they know what they can get out of the various forums that are ongoing, and they can pick and choose what works best for them. Right. You also can introduce certain quality gates, so that you are able to do the right kind of reviews at the right time, so that because you're operating in such a scale and magnitude, you're not on accidentally going in directions which leads to the consistency and the quality of your product not being as great as before. And lastly, I think from the team point of view, it's no longer just about guilds and communities as well, but when your team reaches a particular size, in design ops you would also look at how do we best structure this design team, so that it leads to maximum value in the organization, right? Should the designers be embedded as part of product pods, and essentially just be dedicated towards that? Should design be a shared function, right? It's a singular central team within the organization, and anybody who has needs to work on the design factors, approaches and works with that team? Or is that somewhere in the middle? It's a little bit of a hybrid model between the two. Here's a very high level example from the recent work that I was talking about for my public sector clients. Some of the advanced work that we are doing here, the blueprint example that I was talking about, we had this very interesting challenge in this program about identifying the overlaps, right? So when you have 20 plus products being built at the same time, how do you know what touch point brings together which of the product combinations? And one of the useful tools through which we were able to address it was looking at a journey blueprint where if some of you are familiar with frameworks like jobs to be done, etc., I highly recommend that framework as well, by the way, if some of you may want to read on it. um, it's identifying essentially what are the user tasks for which users. You put it in a journey map kind of a format, and then your various uh, product groups, spots, etc., can have a view of that and identify, all right, that actually seems to be a similar kind of a task or a similar kind of a need that I'm also working on. So you may potentially identify overlaps, and then you know that you will work closely with that product team so that you are able to join up the dots. As an example, these badges that you see in that rough thumbnail that I've dropped there, these are essentially overlaps which we were identifying in our products, so that we know that there are some jobs which are quite unique to one product at hand, and hence that product has much more autonomy of how they want to design it, versus some others have a very high level of overlap, and hence we know that we have to work on a design that works for all and then use it as a common solution all across, right? um, Design systems are quite mainstream nowadays, so I don't think I'll take much time on that. But some of you, if you would like to read up on what design systems are, they are essentially a way in which somebody documents not just their design language, but your design language, the design principles, as well as almost a UI kit in terms of your components. Uh, I should not even just say UI. It's going to be a combination of UI, flow patterns, instructions towards other media formats, like for example, how should your content be designed, how should your media in terms of voice, etc., be designed, if you are also having that as a part of your ecosystem, right? So design system is quite powerful to do that. I highly would advocate you to check out Airbnb's design system, and for some of you who are more platform oriented in your work, Salesforce Lightning design system, and you would see um, what efficiencies and improvements they lead to. Now, when we were working on these things as well, right, I think when we executed that in this project and others, we have seen a trend, right? So we have seen a trend of some things definitely improving. We almost always see consistency improving. Users are not seeing different patterns for what is essentially a similar kind of interaction. We almost always see an improvement in efficiency. So the teams that are utilizing these design ops principles, the way they execute their iterations, there's much more speed in that. The turnaround time gets lesser, and hence teams are able to iterate much faster and get the next releases out to the customers quite fast, right? So these things actually have been quite consistent improvements whenever we have employed design ops in our projects. But there are certain things that still remain outside it, and are potentially some of the side effects that somebody needs to watch out for. One of the areas is, because of the nature in which we specify how things should be done in design ops, sometimes it creates a friction between the creativity and the idea generation that designers and team members may feel they want to actually have much more flexibility and much more autonomy on, right? And while design ops in itself is not intended to stifle that in any way, it does seem like having this kind of a formalized processes in which you are expected to work can lead to some friction there, right? Also, for all that it does, there are certain challenges which still remain open, right? I don't know how many of the participants are in working in technology space, but as an example, this year, as many people have quipped, has been the year of great resignation, as we call it. uh, and this is about people essentially realizing and changing their outlook as we have gone through this massive COVID lockdown, about what things really matter to them and what are their priorities, right? And hence we have seen a really uh, uh, different outlook in terms of what is motivating to the team members. So how do we make sure that the designers in the team stay extremely motivated, extremely engaged, and hence uh, do their best work, stay longer, and then lead to the best value of design, right? And I found that the missing bit in all of this as you work of design ops has been the cultural aspect of it. Not that certain principles that make up a good working culture are not present and or mentioned somewhere in various design op kits, but I've always I've increasingly felt that it's not getting enough emphasis and attention as it should, and hence there are multiple ways in which the way we execute design ops can be improved as well. uh, some quick snapshots as an example, right, as to why uh, culture is quite critical to design teams operating well and hence design operations working really well, right? uh, 15% or less of the employees feel engaged in their current work, right? This is a study by Forbes, and although that number may seem remarkably shocking, it in many organizations reflects the truth of the level of engagement employees feel, right? It's very easy to get bogged down and find your work to be quite business as usual, much more process centric rather than outcome centric, and necessarily not have the actual stakeholder impact that you want to do when you are spending so much time at work, right? So that's a critical factor uh, as to how one of the areas that the team should look at. uh, this year, this is the latest study from this year in the UK where I currently work. More than 1 in 4 are looking to change the jobs in the next few months, right? So for all the work that you may do with the team, and if you're unable to retain the great talent that you have in your design team, uh, there's a lot of kind of momentum loss that happens, and potential loss that happens anytime you have too many changes in the team, right? So it's one of the ways for which any design leader and any design team manager needs to look at is what are the ways in which we can improve um, the longevity of our key talent staying back with us, doing their best work, and feeling engaged and motivated as they do that, right? um, 45% of US employees, as example, feel excluded at work, right? They do not feel that they can be their authentic selves. They do not feel like uh, you know they have idea meritocracy at work, where if they have the right ideas they'll get attention, and they feel that depending on who they are and their beliefs, and their background, their ideas do not get the weightage as they should, right? And there is at least a minimum of 20% performance gaps, as surveys show, in terms of when you actually have an engaged and motivated team that's working on something versus not, right? So, and 20% is a very significant bit, even by if we had to be a very rational analyzer of what is the benefit if we focus a little bit on culture, right? um, so what I did was, I think, the way I was approaching design ops and my learnings that I was sharing with you all before, I just wanted to add in a couple of pillars to that, if you will, right? I wanted to share that, as I talked about the three tiers, a bit earlier in the session. But I think the critical piece is that will make sure that as you work on these things, you actually have the right foundation in your design team through which you can do your best work, but make sure that your team brings the best version of themselves, their work, and drive that impact, is to focus on that foundation tier, which is culture, very strongly in your organization and in your design functions. Um, and as well as the top part of it, which is, as and when you set up this right foundation, you work on these various tiers, uh, you're making sure that you are sharing those success stories, you are measuring and communicating the business impact that the design team is driving, using that in order to evangelize and promote user-centered way of working throughout your organization, throughout your client organizations, if you're part of these partners and vendors ecosystem, and essentially just pushing for more and more user-centered way of working across your organizations, right? uh, One of the tricks that kind of helped me a lot, because I try to play around with how do I work on improving work culture in various design teams that I have led in various geographies, right? um, I think there's also like some very interesting social cultural bits of it, right? I think what probably will work best in order to motivate and engage a team can be slightly different and nuanced if I'm when I used to work in for and with the design team in the Nordics versus in the UK versus in India, right? Um, but one thing I've always realized is, I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong, and in fact, diversity in terms of thoughts and outlooks is great when it comes to innovation and team performance. But one of the things that really helped me was, I started exploring establishing a manifesto for the design team, right? And if you look on the left, that's my horrible attempt at a joke. But I was talking about, when I say manifestos, I'm absolutely not talking about you writing a generation changing design manifesto like diagrams, which probably gets referred to many decades down the line as a Bible. And I'm not talking about starting a complete movement in design world and software development world like the Agile Manifesto did, right? I'm simply talking about having a north star, having a way in which you bring your teams together in terms of um, the right values, the right goals, and the right ways in which we want to operate and we want to work in order to win together, right? So, in my various attempts of writing these manifestos in my various engagements, some of the things that really work for me are, I love to establish a shared vision of success, right? Uh, while I think our ways in which we will execute work may change, and one of the key principles of that I've added below is revisiting and evolving this together, right? So at no point of time should you consider your design ops processes and manifestos locked down because they have been perfected. That does not exist, right? But it's all about bringing everybody together on how would we know if we are going in the right direction, and if the team is winning, right? And it's important that whether people may have differences in the way they would like to approach that, they at least shared a common view of what is it that we want to achieve and how would we know when we have achieved it, right? um, if that does not happen, then you have a different problem in your hand, and as a manager and as a leader, you need to address that rather than kind of live with it in your team, right? Values you cherish, right? So some of the things that I focus on, and these can be quite mundane things as well, so I talk about, for example, how we cherish proactivity and ownership when we are working on things, and some of the things that actually we don't value that much, right? So for example, we can be flexible in terms of your, it can be as simple of things as working hours, etc., right? So essentially, what's important, what's non-compromisable versus what we are quite open and flexible on, right? um, Quality standards, how does good look like? Stewardship, right? So stewardship is about what are the behaviors that we want to uphold and inculcate, right? So the fact that we will always believe in the best ideas and the best questions, and we will not, as our way of working, lead to hierarchical decision making and stuff like that, right? We'll promote continuous learning, to improve and to make sure that everybody in the team improves as a result of it. Um, and we'll finally induce the goal that, you know as we bring an inclusive mindset to a team, will win together or lose together, right? So there is no uh, you know I mean, I do believe in a healthy competitive way, but in a constructive manner. I absolutely do not push for any behavior in the team where in order for somebody to win, somebody has to lose, right? So how do we push for that group win ideology and mentality in our team, right? So it's a fun exercise. I found it very weird, to be honest, the first time I was writing or attempting some of this. But I've honestly realized that over a period of time, trying to establish a manifesto by yourself, together with the team, and then making sure you come back to it from time to time, polish and revise it, leads to a good set of engagement and certain level of motivation increase in your team, and that uh, goes a pretty strong way in terms of making sure that you are focusing on culture in your team, right? This is only one of many tips, but I think as many of you would know, to have a great team culture, in order to have a high performance culture, there are many things that go together with this as well. But I think these are some of the things that I believe has worked with me and my design functions. So I thought, I'll share some of these tips with you. uh, I think that was it that I wanted to actually share. I'll probably take a very quick pause here in case we have any questions, feedback, suggestions that we would like to discuss.
Thank you, Anirudh. That was quite a detailed journey you took us through from design ops to the manifesto. Uh, so let me ask you a couple of questions while we wait for audience questions to come in.
Sure.
Your detail-oriented process that you took us through in terms of design ops, somewhere the designers feel that what they do is a creative activity and this is too many constraints and too many boxes you're putting us in and we want to rebel against this.
Yeah. I think I was the same, to be honest, when I started, and I certainly believe there is some truth to that, even as of today, right? But I think it depends on, essentially, right? I think the reason why values and success definition is important is because that decides what takes priority over other things. So, for example, given my nature of work, and obviously I currently work in consulting and vendor setup, right? So my goals quite closely align with my clients' goals, right? So if I am signing up for a particular transformation initiative or a new service initiative, right, I want to make sure that that happens. And the one of the big arts in design is also to make sure you are able to show the impact in their terms, right? So one of the big things that I learned over the years was, how do I link my design process and my design outputs? Like, here were the number of ideas that I could identify in the market that you have not thought of, right? Here were some of the key explorations that I did, and I validated that in the market. And here are some things that can really lead to a lot of business for you, right? But this transition from communicating that in terms of, here are my design problem statements or design ideas, and actually starting to communicate that in terms of their language. If I'm talking to a business sponsor, if I can phrase it and share this in terms of what kind of a potential revenue change it may mean for you, right? I think a big part of selling and influence is and I think, and designers know it actually quite well as compared to many other functions, right, is how do we communicate it in ways that resonates with our audience group, right? And I think taking that own design lesson in your own way of working, um, and not just communicating, but that gives you that perspective, right? So if your clients potentially, for example, let's take an example that you are you were retasked with redesigning a particular product that exists, right? And you came in, and actually in your research and your work, you think that, oh, this product potentially covers 5% of the potential it has, right? And we as designers would absolutely love it to talk about the real potential and solve the bigger picture, right? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But the way you sell that change, can you influence that, and are your clients in position to take that bet right now, right? So you may need to stage the way you advance it. So you may work pragmatically with the clients to do that first step in that direction right now, but don't lose sight of your big picture ideas, your explorations. I think design certainly has hugely and immensely a lot to offer in the bigger picture. It is just how do we shape the journey and how do we bring our stakeholders, throughout the journey with us. Because if we try to kind of create our own path separate and do not bring them along the journey, then I've realized it does not resonate as well, and it does not actually lead to change in things.
Right? There are times to break the rules, and there are sometimes you should play by the rules. All
Absolutely.
right, Aniruddha, I think that's all we have time for. Thank you very much for joining us from London. Thank you for being part of Odisha Design Week. And thank you for taking us through the design ops journey. It's a fascinating insight into a whole other way of working. We are used to the, shall we say, controlled anarchy of a design studio, where everything is done based on understanding each other, knowing each other, the physical proximity of a design studio. But when you work in disaggregated teams around the world, with projects around the world, you have to adopt a new way of working, and design ops, I guess, is the way to go.
Absolutely. I think it's a fascinating area of work. I think we as an industry are just getting started on that, and I think it has ways to mature. But it's a fantastic area to explore, your skills and the direction of the industry. Thank you so much, Suresh and Deep, for having me.
Thank you
It's
once
really
again
great.
for joining us. It's been fascinating. Our next session with Daniel Sim begins at 5:30 p.m. in the India time. That's about 12 minutes from now. I'll see you there at that session. Thank you.
Thanks.